Hydration isn't only for athletes training, it's for all of us. It's a huge part of daily maintenance. Whether you were in New Orleans, Japan, or honestly anywhere in the world this summer, there was no escaping the crazy heat wave we had. When I was in Japan back in July, I spent plenty of time outdoors, walking from place to place, just a hot, sweaty mess. While those convenience stores along the way had some refreshing drinks like Pocari Sweat, there was one thing I wish I had brought along with me for the trip: Liquid IV, the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. I found out about Liquid IV after getting back, and I'll say the convenient packaging alone makes this a must-bring wherever you're going, be it any type of travel, business or pleasure, after a workout, sometime outside in the heat, or maybe just after a long night with friends. With only one stick and 16 ounces of water, Liquid IV hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone, while taking in 5 essential vitamins, that's B3, B5, B6, B12, and C, and 3 times the electrolytes as leading sports drinks. It comes in 12 tasty flavors. My favorite, personally, is strawberry lemonade and tropical punch. Real people, real flavor, real hydrating. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use Krewe of Japan, KREWEOFJAPAN, at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when shopping Better Hydration today using promo code Krewe of Japan at liquidiv.com. What are you waiting for? Get hydrated. Hello, I'm Doug, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan podcast.
Peekaboo, we got some bonus content for you. The crew is hard at work plotting out season 5 and lining up guests and interviews. We got some fire guests already locked in for this season, so get hyped. But it's also that time of year for one other thing: the JET program application cycle. As everyone knows by now, I'm a former JET, right? You know that. I was there for 3 years, did my thing. But 2 years ago, we hosted Tye Ebel, the JET coordinator from the Consulate-General of Japan in Nashville, for an episode talking about the JET program and its application process. It was actually one of our more popular episodes of all time, not just that season. Well, a lot has happened since then, so we're bringing back Tye for a quick update on the JET application process, but this time with his colleague and culture coordinator at the same consulate, Jonathan Contrades. Interested in learning more about the application process and what's changed? Or maybe looking for some tips and tricks for your referral letters, statement of purpose, or just how to fill out the application? Well, we got you covered, so let's hop into the interview. Here's what's going on with Japan Society in New Orleans. Be sure to check the show notes for more links and information. Here we go. On Sunday, November 5th at 4 p.m., join the Quiet On Book Club via Zoom to discuss this month's book, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. On Thursday, November 9th at 6:30 p.m., Japan Society New Orleans is hosting its annual meeting at the Southern Yacht Club. Come hang out with the crew and the rest of Japan Society in New Orleans and find out what Japan Society has been up to and our big plans for 2024. Hint, hint, Matsue Sister City Exchange Program. On Saturday, November 18th at 10 a.m., through a hands-on instructor-led workshop, learn the history and traditional techniques of Ikebana at Lakeview Presbyterian Church. And lastly, on Wednesday, November 29th at 6 p.m., catch a screening of Studio Ghibli's classic Spirited Away at Margaret Place. Check the event page on Japan Society's website and or on social media for sign up and more details about each of these events. It'll all be linked out in the show notes. Hope to see you there. We are doing a kind of throwback slash... Oh, it's not really a throwback because this happens every year, right? It's not, but we're going to talk about the JET program and the application process and everything. And once again, I've brought on a familiar face. We have a returning guest, Tye Ebel, who works at the Consulate-General of Japan in Nashville. Brought him back for another quick short bonus episode that we're doing in between our seasons 4 and 5 because right now is the time. It is the JET application process and period for the upcoming JET year. Tye, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
And we also have culture coordinator Jonathan Contrades. Thank you both for joining me today to talk about the JET program and answer some questions because, again, last time we talked was in 2021 in the early fall. So it's been a couple years. Since then, Japan's reopened its borders. A lot's happened. 2 years, right? But there's a few things that we're not really sure about, like what's changed in terms of the JET application process or just JET in general. So before we get into that, though, I want to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves a little bit more and give us some background information. We already talked about your roles at the consulate. Tye, you want to go first?
Yeah, I was a jet myself from 2007 until 2010. Lived in a small town called Yamamoto-cho in Kagawa Prefecture. Taught at a junior high and several elementary schools. Loved my time on jet, so much so that when I came back after graduate school, when I started looking at careers, things to jump into, I wound up here in Nashville as the jet program coordinator, and I've actually been running the program from Nashville since 2015. So I've got to send 8 groups of jets out of Nashville in that time.
Yeah, I've been about to say, we've been kind of going back and forth with like jet alumni stuff for a while.
We're both starting to seem about as old as dirt, aren't we?
I know. I was actually on jet the same 3 years you were. So 2007 to 2010. So yeah, that's, we're old, man.
Right on.
Well, then I guess that makes me the next generation. Once again, I'm Jonathan Contrades. I am the Cultural Programs Coordinator at the Consulate-General of Japan in Nashville. I was a jet from 2012 to 2017. So I did 5 years in a small town called Genkai in Saga Prefecture, which is not far from Fukuoka on Kyushu. After I was on jet, I stayed in Japan for a few years. I worked at a university in Oita, and then after that, I worked in the private sector for a year in Tokyo before coming back to the US.
Okay, so you got some long time in Japan, man. You were over there for quite a bit. That's awesome. And for those who are listening, maybe for the first time, I was on jet, like I said, from 2007 to 2010 in Fukushima on Honshu. So we got 3 of the big 4 islands covered here.
Yeah, wow.
Fukushima Prefecture and Iwaki City. I did elementary school for that time, exclusively elementary school. It was the Wild West back then. That was before they had a Japanese government program for elementary schools. We were wild. We got to do whatever. So we each kind of have a diverse group of placements and experiences here. But for maybe those who are listening, they happen to get this pop up into their podcast feed or whatever it may be, and they don't know what the JET program is. Could one or both of you give a little insight into what the JET program is? And then some of the basic requirements for the program.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So the JET program is a Japanese government program that's been around since 1987 that recruits and hires predominantly recent college graduates to go over and work in Japan, primarily in the public school system, teaching anywhere from elementary school to senior high school. Although there are also positions working in government offices for folks with a really high level of pre-existing Japanese. It's a great chance to get over and experience Japan. You earn a competitive salary. Your flight to and from Japan is covered. You get excellent health insurance while you're over there in Japan. You're going over on a 12-month commitment with the potential to extend, as everyone listening to this has heard, all 3 of us extended multiple years. It's possible to extend up to 5 total years on the JET program. As far as criteria, the application goes live every fall, generally late September to mid-November. To be eligible for the JET program USA, the American-focused version of it, you need to have U.S. citizenship and a bachelor's degree before you start the JET program. So what that means is that if there's anyone listening to this who hasn't finished school but will be finishing, this coming May, you are eligible to apply. If you've been out of school for a while, you're also eligible to apply. Underclassmen, obviously, you'd need to wait a little bit of time.
You mentioned that there was a role for people who have a high level of proficiency in Japanese. That is a good point because a lot of people ask, do I need to know Japanese? Is it important that I know Japanese prior to going to Japan? And we always say it helps, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I think the criteria that we're given by Tokyo to kind of emphasize when we're selecting jets, as you might expect, the JET is an acronym, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. So the check marks that people have to have, they need to be able to demonstrate a strong interest in exchange and teaching, and they need to be able to demonstrate a strong interest in Japan. So you don't necessarily need to know Japanese, but you need to be able to point to things in your life that demonstrate a longer term interest in Japan than, just 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah, I can speak to that because when I got onto the JET program, I was coming off of teaching English in China for a year. And I got onto the JET program knowing no Japanese, knowing a little bit of Chinese, but they still hired me. So you don't need to know Japanese when you apply at the very least.
Awesome. Another thing you did mention too, predominantly recent college graduates, but I don't know about you guys when you were on Jet, but I had a few friends of mine that they worked for like 10 years of their life out of college, and they were like, all right, I need a break from the real world. I don't want to say real world. It's still real world when you go on Jet, but I need a break from my life and to try something new and try something different. And this offers that opportunity to those people who may be looking for some kind of career change or a refresh of sorts.
Yeah, I will say the criteria gets a little stricter once you get into your late 30s, into your 40s. It does become a little bit more selective. We did, though, this year, we just sent a 67-year-old gentleman over as a CIR. He was retired from 30 years in the Department of State. He had been a deputy consul general for the U.S. government in, I think, Fukuoka.
That's incredible.
Really good credentials. So even though he was beyond the retirement age in Japan, we were still able to send him on the JET program.
So the upper limit for age is more of a soft limit. It's a soft cap, not actually like, it's like the NBA with the salaries, right? You can go over it, but you have to circumvent.
Yeah. Is there a hard limit?
There used to be, right?
No, I would have thought that it would have been like 60 or 65 because of retirement, but 67-year-old John sent over.
There we go. So if you have any, anyone in their 40s, 50s, 60s looking to go on Jet, I mean,
don't count yourself out.
Can't hurt to fly, right? So we covered the basics of like what the JET program is and the requirements for it. But, what we wanted to ask about is JET was paused. A lot, the placements and everything, like the rest of the world, really, during the pandemic, a lot of things pressed pause. Japan specifically, there was no inbound foreigners going into Japan or anything for school, work, a lot of different things, tourists, everything. So once they reopened the borders and applications for JET were starting to be accepted, and I think they were still being accepted during that time, it's just kind of waitlisted, right? Was there a massive change in the applicant volume from pre-pandemic days to now? Is there a big volume of applicants has it gone down? Has it gone up? What's it like?
Yeah, it's actually gone down. And I think it's more when you consider there are those folks who really want to go to Japan, kind of diehard Japan fans. And those folks are going to go regardless. But right now we're in an environment where unemployment's quite low in the US. So recent college graduates have lots of job opportunities here. At the same time that the Japanese yen has really lost a lot of its value against the US dollar.
Yeah.
And so I think the salary, it's just not looking quite as competitive to some applicants. So understandably, there has been a drop in applicant numbers. For anyone considering applying, though, I think that the great part is that there hasn't been a drop in demand on the Japan side. So your chances of getting on JET are better now than they have been in recent years. And even though the salary when converted, your first year you get paid 3.36 million yen, which a few years ago was in the low $30,000 range converted to dollars. Right now with the weak yen, it's more like 24,000. But on the Japan side, they haven't had that crazy inflation or anything that we had here. So the salary that you're making over there, when I'm talking to my current jets, it sounds like the buying power is still about the same as it was when we were on the jet program.
Right.
You can still live that kind of comfortable life over in Japan. I think it's just kind of the sticker shock when you're recruiting someone right out of college and, that they're looking at maybe a job not as exciting as going to live over in Japan, but a job that, pays 2 or 3 times as much,
Right.
It can be a little harder to sell.
Well, and on top of that, you get the subsidized housing in some situations. Not obviously every situation is different, right? The phrase, the motto of JET, but the housing could be free in some situations. I knew people who just were given a house that was owned by the government in the city they were in, but it just depends.
And even if it's not being subsidized, rent in Japan is significantly cheaper in most places.
As long as you're not in like Tokyo
right. Well, even in Tokyo, you can find places that would be much cheaper than, say, here in Nashville. With a comparative standard of living, I would say.
Sure.
Jonathan just moved to Nashville, so he got to go through the apartment search process.
It was pretty shocking because my last job in Japan had me living in Yokohama and commuting into Tokyo. And I was able to live relatively close to a major train station. And my rent was about 80,000 yen per month, which in America is that's like $600 as opposed to my rent here in Nashville, which is a very small apartment for about $1,200 a month.
And you've got to share a kitchen.
And it's a shared kitchen.
Oh.
Something else we should mention is that your salary on JET does go up for the first 3 years. Like it starts out at 3.3 million, then second year it's 3.6, and then it's 3.9 for your last 3 years. If you
a little incentive to stick around,
Yeah,
a little bump and pay, which is nice to see. It's good to hear that if you're interested in jet, like now is the prime time to do it. If you have money saved up over here, bring it with you because the buying power of the dollar right now is great.
When I went to Japan, this was right after the 2008 crash. And so the yen was very highly valued. And so it was like 80 yen to the dollar.
Yeah.
And so if you were making money in Japan, you were doing very well for yourself. But when I was moving to Japan, I was like, man, I was losing a lot of money taking it over.
Yeah. Now it's very different. If you bring it over with you, you're great. You're in a good situation right there. Part of our last episode that we did with you, Tye, we highlighted the JET application process, and I'm sure a lot hasn't really changed since the fall of 2021. Are there some specifics that maybe have changed since then? Or anything that you want to highlight as something that absolutely don't mess this up? Something that maybe has been a trend in the last couple years that has been a sticking point for successful applicants?
First, as far as changes go, we basically, during our last interview, everything was still in a bit of upheaval because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
At this point, we've largely reverted back to pre-pandemic style application, recent pre-pandemic style application. So everything's online now like it was before. It's still actually slightly up in the air. Maybe by the time you publish this, a decision will have been made. During the pandemic, we were having our interviews remotely over Zoom.
Okay.
In order to social distancing, limited contact, and all of that.
Sure.
We're still hoping that we'll be able to offer the interviews remotely this year because it just makes it easier on folks who don't live near a consulate to be able to go and take part in the interview. But Tokyo is still showing an interest in having in-person interviews, reverting back to the in-person interviews that existed pre-COVID-19. And so that's still where we're waiting, every day, refresh our email. To see when they're going to make that final decision. But yeah, so that could be one change.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's interesting because I was lucky. I think the last year that the consulate was in New Orleans before they moved to Nashville was when I left for JET. So I was able to apply and interview here. I didn't have to travel, but I know people who applied in subsequent years and they had to go to Nashville. They had to go to Houston because we were in the Nashville umbrella, but Houston's a lot closer to Nashville. So some people pick that consulate, although there are things that, competitive, how many applicants does Houston get versus Nashville, it's just up in the air. So there's things to consider there, but that hopefully they are allowing the Zoom interviews. That would definitely be a money saver and a time saver.
Yeah, so
I think it would make things easier for everyone involved.
Yeah. Although personally, I kind of like doing the in-person interviews. I like having that face-to-face, but I know that's not for everybody. So it just depends.
I enjoy the in-person interviews, and I think that they're a bit more impactful.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe that I'm getting a better read on someone when I meet them face-to-face than when I see them over the Zoom screen and they're sitting on their dorm bed doing the interview.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think, especially realizing that with the weak yen right now and the potential cost of, coming to a place like Nashville or Houston and maybe having a hotel for the night and all that, I think for the applicants, it would be great for this.
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So anything else that you think of off the top of your head that has changed or may potentially change, or something you see maybe going forward in the future years that is in the works, but maybe not official yet?
So being a Japanese government program, it tends to remain pretty steady from year to year. And then every so often they'll do a refresh. So they did a refresh. I think the last substantial refresh was around 2011 when they changed some of the structure of the program. And then in 2016, 2017, at some point we swapped over to the online application.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a US only reset.
Jealous, man. Jealous.
I know they have it so much easier these days. When I applied when I was living in China, so I had to FedEx all of these documents that I had to print out. I had to FedEx them to the embassy in the United States. And then that was also when all of the recommendation letters had to be done in paper. And I remember you had to have your professor or whoever was recommending you, they had to put their letter into an envelope and sign over the sealed
sign
envelope.
It or stamp it. Yeah.
To show that it hadn't been tampered with. It's very different these days.
Yeah.
I mean, but then you talk to the Jets who, I occasionally interact with Jets who even went on the program in the 80s. And back then it was the snail mail to there was no email, obviously. The snail mail to communicate with family were the extremely expensive phone calls.
Oh yeah. Long
and
distance.
So at least we had Skype right?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems to keep getting easier in some ways.
Actually, the next question I had for you guys was about tips, but you brought up referral letters. I occasionally check in on like the JET program Reddit, and a lot of people have questions about that, about the referral letters, the importance of referral letters, people stressing out over the content of the referral letter, whether or not it actually shines a light on the ability to be a kind of a mentor or in a situation where you maybe were teaching or sharing knowledge. People are freaking out about it. So my question is, how important are referral letters? In the grand scheme of the weight of the application, where does that fall? Like kind of towards the middle, bottom, top, like somewhere in between? It's probably going to say somewhere in between.
You're asking the tricky questions here now. The most important single component of the application is the statement of purpose. Yeah. And that's that cover letter that you as the applicant have total control. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I would say reference letters are rather important because they're someone else's view of you. They're giving us other perspectives on a candidate. Mm-hmm. So it is beneficial, if possible, to have strong reference letters. Now, as far as the content of the reference letter, the more that someone can speak to your abilities to be good for the job or the position that you're applying for, the better. But obviously, most of the folks that are going to write these letters only have a view of you from one particular person. So for instance, I don't know, if you were looking at asking a professor to write a letter for you and you were trying to choose between a professor that led a study abroad trip that you went on and a professor that's only seen you in the classroom in the US, chances are that study abroad professor will be able to write a letter that shows a more rounded view of you, can speak about you in an international environment and things like that, in addition to just the academic side of you. Beyond that, when you're getting the reference letters, it could be better, in my opinion, to have one letter written by a professor and one letter written by a professional contact, a supervisor, for instance, provided that supervisor can really speak to your ability to be a good employee in a way that's relevant to JET.
Sure.
You do sometimes see folks will ask, like they work at Subway and they ask their assistant manager at Subway to write the letter, and the assistant manager writes like a 2-sentence letter, shoots that thing off. Like that's doing you basically no good whatsoever. That's doing us no good assessing you as a candidate. So whoever you're asking to write their letter, make sure that they realize that it is an important thing they're being asked to do. The benefit of university folks is that they're used to doing this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When you're going that professional route, some of them are used to it and can write a really good letter, but just make sure that the person who's going to be writing it is going to put a little effort.
Yeah, make sure you let them know what it's for.
Yeah. Tell them the importance of the program, what you'd be doing, so they can sort of flesh it out as best as they possibly can.
Yeah, basically, write it for them, but don't actually write it for them. Like, just say, hey, this is what I need you to say.
I suggest the person you're asking to write, as long as it doesn't feel uncomfortable providing them, but you could provide them with a little summary of the JET program and then maybe a bullet list of different experiences that they've had with you that might reflect what we're looking for.
That's a great tip. And that's not even JET specific. That's like anytime you need a reference letter.
Any sort of job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any sort of job.
So do you have any other tips for the JET application process that either of you, maybe personal experience or just you've seen through JETs passing through, or maybe questions that have been asked to you?
I would say, again, looking at the name, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, the most important thing is to make sure that you're selling yourself as a candidate, as someone who's interested in Japan, who's interested in exchange, and who's interested in teaching. One place that you sometimes find people who fall through, they might sell themselves as a great teacher, but perhaps honestly, they don't have that much interest in Japan, but they don't even make an attempt of trying to sell us an interest in Japan.
Yeah.
At least polish it up a little bit.
Gotcha.
At least try to explain, create some sort of narrative as to why you're interested in Japan. And then on the flip side, we'll have the candidates who spend a lot of time talking about how much they love Japan, and then they barely even touch on how they would be a decent assistant language teacher or CIR. They don't talk about their qualifications for the job that they're applying for. And you really do need to do both, I think.
There's got to be a balance. Yeah.
And I think that's a big change to the program over the last 10 years that I've seen, is that in the program's past, the ideal candidate was someone who maybe had a sort of passing interest in Japan and wanted to go there, but maybe wasn't really super interested in teaching, because the goal for the program was to create cultural ambassadors who would go to Japan, get a good impression of the country, share being a foreigner there, and share their culture with students in the Japanese education system, and then come back to the United States and be sort of an evangelist for Japan. But what I've seen over the last 10 years is that they're really trying to emphasize that this is an English teaching program that's also going to be sharing foreign culture with Japanese students. And so emphasizing your ability or at least interest in teaching and your experience in teaching is, I think, pretty key these days.
Sure. And do you have any tips? Now, this is not so much for the application process, but maybe a little bit further down the line. Any tips that would help people prepare for life in Japan? Or how to temper expectations of life in Japan?
I would say, at least for tips on acclimating to life in Japan, is the second you find out you're going to Japan, or maybe even if you find out that you're interviewing, you've got to start learning Japanese. Because if you don't have any experience with Japanese, it is such a difficult language to start out with, at the very least, because you're starting out with a completely new way of writing sentences, completely new syllabary, all, with the kanji. It's so difficult if you don't have any experience with it that you're going to need that, considering you'll find out probably in April or May-ish. And so you've got about 3 months before you go to Japan. You just got to start hitting the books, watching YouTube videos, using whatever resources you have at your disposal to start learning Japanese, because it will make your life so much easier when you hit the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
And more generally speaking, and this could probably be applied to any time you're jumping into a new experience, is to keep an open mind and try to be as flexible as possible. You can research Japan as much as you want. You can research the area that you are going to be living as much as you want. But until you're actually over there, it's basically impossible to have a solid idea of what to expect.
Right.
In my experience, and I always, even with my wife on like vacations and stuff, I'm always like, let's set the expectations low, and then we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yes, good idea.
I think, most jets go over there and have a grand time, just really love their time on jet. But the ones who seem to struggle the most are the ones that go over there with the really lofty expectations.
And especially because of the nature of the jet program. I mean, the motto is every situation is different.
The unofficial motto.
The unofficial. True. Yes, the unofficial motto of the program is every situation is different. And so, I mean, I can talk about how much I love the jet program. I did it for 5 years. I must have loved it. But there are, of course, going to be people who did not have the best time on the program.
Sure. Now, when you're talking about researching and whatnot, obviously, again, keeping low expectations, but if people are looking for resources to research Japan or to research the JET program or how to best prepare, do you know any good online resources that could be helpful for applicants during the process of application, but also preparation for leaving?
So official ones, there's jetprogramusa.org, and that's run out of the embassy, focused on the JET program as it relates to Americans. That's where you'll get all the official information. And you can actually augment that with information that's on the international site, which is JET program, spelled the British way with an extra M and an E at the end, .org. And then one other official source that you could look at is ajet.net. Basically, all the jets in Japan are part of AJET, the Association of Jet. And so they maintain their own website. They have smaller websites for individual prefectures. And there are a lot of good resources on there that you can pick through. For instance, one of the AJET chapters has a really good unofficial tax guide for jets who are over there. And
cool.
That's Kumamoto.
Kumamoto.
Yes.
Kumamoto.
Yeah, that was very helpful for me. That's something that especially American jets need to keep in mind, is that, not only is navigating the Japanese tax structure is actually relatively easy. It's filing your American taxes that's going to be the real complicated factor for American jets in Japan.
I'm going to not comment on that because I may or may not have done it the first couple of years and then caught myself up after.
All of us may or may not have done that.
Well, it's also more complicated now because back in our time, there was a tax treaty between the United States and Japan where we didn't have to pay Japanese taxes for the first couple years that we were in Japan, but I believe that's
I think it was
gone.
3 years, I don't think I paid any taxes for either side.
See, I was told that it was for 2 years with the tax treaty, but then I didn't get charged any taxes on my third year, so I just I didn't raise a complaint or anything
because of the way the fiscal year works in Japan. It's kind of offset, so that might explain it.
Okay, well, hey. No one's listening, right? We're going to be getting some letters from the IRS soon.
Well, I think I can give some sort of, because I am not the JET coordinator, I can give some unofficial resources. When I was applying for JET, I would just go onto YouTube. This is nascent YouTube, and I would just find people who had successfully gotten on the JET program. And even back then, there were a few people who were giving their walkthrough of the JET application process. And I pretty much just followed what they did. I found the ideas that were good, and that's what I did. And it worked out for me. On top of that, there's the JET program subreddit there. They have some pretty good advice that I found there back in the day. I think there are plenty of resources of people who have successfully navigated the JET application process and who have been very open with how they succeeded.
Yeah, my only caution when you're looking at YouTube or Reddit, keep in mind you have a lot of JETs who might have theories as to how they got on the JET program, or might have their own, that they think that they've read the tea leaves and they've predicted some stuff and they'll give advice. And it's always kind of fun to look at that stuff. Some of the advice, just by happenstance, is good and correct, but some of it's just way off and makes absolutely no sense logically. So I think it's good, as Jonathan is saying, to look at these to get different perspectives on the JET program, but don't believe that because some extremely popular blogger has their, how to fill out the JET application and get an interview guide, that will be accurate information. It probably has some good advice, but it probably also
not 100% accurate.
Yes.
Because when you think about it, there are over the years so few JET coordinators and so few people who sort of have been able to peek behind the curtain and actually see the application process.
And we're not allowed to talk about it after the fact. Yeah. These non-disclosure agreements and stuff.
That's very true. And so there's not much firsthand information about the JET application process that's on the internet.
Yeah.
And so when you have these successful JETs who are sharing what they know, it is a lot of speculation. So it's not gospel.
One other source that I might point out is tofugu.com.
Okay.
Not sure if you guys are familiar with it.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it. Yeah. It's run, or at least it was run, by some JET alumni up in the Pacific Northwest. But they have, a lot of their content is focused on like Japan and learning Japanese and things like that. But they also have some good content on preparing to be a teacher in Japan and kind of JET experience as well. Awesome.
And from what I've seen, it seems to be a pretty responsibly moderated blog.
Awesome. So before we wrap things up, because that was all great information, I had a couple other questions, just like quick hitters. Is there a spot on the application? This is new for me because I haven't applied for JET in, I don't even want to do math right now, but a long time, 16 years, long time. And so is there a spot now where you can specify or call out, like if there is a medical or location request specific to medical or maybe family or something like those kind of things? Do you need to put that in your statement of purpose, or is there another spot on the application where you can mention these kind of like medical requirements or things like that? Because I know there is a requirement from a letter from your physician or something along those lines. But if there's something that's driving a need to be in a certain location, can you specify that with a reason, or do you need to put that somewhere else?
So on the application, there is a place to list your placement preferences. And next to that is the reason why you're requesting that area. So that's one spot where you can list it, where it goes straight to placement preferences. Sometimes you will see it, though, listed on the self-assessment or the thing filled out by the doctor. They'll throw in like an extra little bit about how they need to live next to a major hospital or something like that.
Got it. Yeah, because I had a couple of people that had, when I was working Japan Fest, and someone had asked me about that. And I was pretty sure, I'm like, I think when you request, I just wasn't familiar with the new application process. I don't want to say new, but like the non-paper application process where that could be found.
Again, preferences are considered, but they're not guaranteed.
Right.
And in my experience, even if like the form says that you need to live close to a major medical facility, that's still general enough to where I've had people get placed and they don't feel like they are as close as they would like to as major of a medical facility as they would like. Like they're not on little remote islands or something like that, but like, oh, I'm down the street from a general hospital, but it doesn't have the level of specialist that I would like to be next to.
So would including that level of specialty, like, oh, I need it for this reason, help, or not really?
It must help, because I had only ever heard that really preferences, if you just have generic preferences, like I would like to live near Osaka, that's generally almost always ignored. And that really the only preferences or requests that are ever honored are for medical or family reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it would be putting a lot on, so it's the folks at CLARE, Council of Local Authorities for International Relations, that does the actual pairing with contracting organizations. So if you name like a very specific sort of doctor that you need to be by and you just list that, I feel like that's putting a lot of work on the folks at CLARE to figure out where in the country these specific
where are these specialists.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. But again, good information it can't hurt to add that on there. It doesn't take away points or anything like that. It's good to know that's available. Those spots are available on the application. A few spots if you need to make those, especially for medical purposes. But with that said, I'm going to wrap this up because this is a bonus episode. Don't want to go too long. You guys got to go back to work. I got to go back to work.
This is more interesting than normal work.
Yeah, same. But I want to give you an opportunity to kind of pitch anything that you might want to bring to people's attention, especially with deadlines coming up shortly. Less than a month away, right? I don't know the actual
November
deadline.
17th is the application deadline.
Okay.
If you're interested in applying this year and you're eligible to apply this year and you haven't started the application, go ahead, don't delay, go ahead and start the application. You don't have to submit it all at once. You can work on it a little bit at a time, but it does take some time to get everything together. Case in point, those reference letters. One way to just about guarantee a bad reference letter is to ask someone and be like, I need by tomorrow's the deadline. I need you to submit this letter, right? So I would say by the end of this month, but by the beginning of November, you should be starting that application if you haven't already, to give yourself a little bit of time to get everything together. Beyond that, when you're filling out the application, it'll ask for, there's different categories. There's stuff that you can list for teaching experience, formal teaching experience, informal teaching experience, international and intercultural experience, all those kind of things. And every piece of information that you put on that application could potentially help you along the path to getting an interview. So you want to fill out that application as thoroughly as possible. I think there can be a tendency, if you're trying to do it all at once, that you fill it all out with everything that you know, and then maybe you hit submit. It's better to just pause on it, sleep on it for a couple days, then go back and fill it in a bit more thoroughly. Because who knows, there could be, the New Orleans Japan Fest. Maybe you've only attended the New Orleans Japan Fest, not much of a commitment, not much of a time thing, but some connection to Japan. You might not think to put that on the application initially because, again, not much of a commitment, what does that actually mean? But if there is a spot for intercultural experience that is a link, obviously that's not going to be as impressive as having gone to Japan or something, but having gone and participated in that festival is still something. And so it's always good. Start filling it out, hit pause, sleep on it, talk to some friends about it, brainstorm, and then come back and try to fill in the small spaces where you can.
Excellent advice there. Don't leave a blank if you don't have to, because any kind of connection to Japan, if you have that in your life in some way where it's some kind of exchange, then don't hesitate to insert it. Put it in there.
Yeah, but and obviously be honest, right?
Yeah, don't lie.
Sometimes you run into these things where people will they'll write about their love of Japanese philosophy or something. And then, woe be it to them if on their interview panel they have a philosopher, a philosophy professor or something.
I think that's a question I would ask.
Yeah, because then you start getting hit with those questions. And if you can't start naming some Japanese philosophers, then suddenly we all know that you're a big fat liar.
Yeah.
So, be honest. Nothing's worse than being caught in a lie. So be honest, but fill it out as thoroughly as possible.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else? Or?
Well, actually, the consulate will actually be at the Memphis Japan Fest. Hopefully, we can see some listeners there on November 5th at the Memphis Botanic Garden. That's a big Japanese festival that's run by the Japan America Society of Tennessee, and we also help support the event. So
awesome. Well, I will make sure to list that in the show notes too. I'll put a link to the event on there. And if this doesn't come out Friday, hopefully, fingers crossed it does. If it doesn't, it should come out by Monday. So there still should be some time to get that out there. So yeah, if you are in that area, feel free to check that festival out. It sounds like it'd be a good one.
And are you going to go back and edit it so that every time you say Friday, you say Monday instead? So that
no, I'm going to leave it in there. I think I did that once when I said oh yeah, this is going to come out Friday, and it didn't. But then I just released it on the next Friday, and then it was all good.
We haven't attached a date to this to the Friday.
Exactly. Exactly.
People don't realize that we're recording this right now on October 12th.
No, it's the 24th.
Okay, I've got a newspaper up of today's date.
Thank God it's audio only. All right. Well, anyway, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer already, but I appreciate all the input and information that you've given us and shared with us today. And I think a lot of people will take away. Tye, your episode about Jet last time is in our top 5 ever downloaded. So it's out there,
yeah.
brother.
Very
so
nice.
I just want to this is a popular topic, and I wanted to make sure we give an update because it has been a couple years. So thank you again, both of you, for joining us, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you back down in New Orleans soon. We'll see.
Hopefully so.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
All right, yeah, thank you. And that's it for this surprise bonus episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the Krewe of Japan podcast. A big thank you to Tye Ebel and Jonathan Contrades for joining me today to talk about the JET program. Hopefully, this episode provided some helpful hints and information regarding the JET program and its application. Check out the show notes for links to the JET application itself, the JET program website, and some other things. And if you're in the Memphis area on November 5th, go check out the Memphis Japan Fest and go say hi to Tye and Jonathan. Applying for the JET program and have questions? We're always happy to help. Reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, or wherever else you're using social media at Krewe of Japan Podcast, KREWEOFJAPAN While you're there, give us a like, follow, share, retweet, comment, whatever floats your boat. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. Or perhaps you prefer to provide your feedback in a more private setting. Send us an email at kreweofjapanpodcast@gmail.com. That's KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST@gmail.com. Speaking of feedback, if you're enjoying what you're listening to today, or this past season, or that episode back in season 2 where you listened to Tye talk about the JET program, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating or review on your favorite podcast streaming app. Every one of those 5-star ratings and reviews helps others interested in Japan and this kind of content find the podcast. And I'm 100% sincere when I say that any and all support is incredibly appreciated. But that's it for today. Until next time, see you in season 5 or our next bonus episode if we have one. Later. Looking to start your own podcast and don't know what platform to use? Tell me about it. When we started the Krewe of Japan podcast, we tried a bunch of the big name recording platforms, but always came back to the one we're still currently using to this day, Zencastr. Zencastr is now the all-in-one solution making podcasting easy. In addition to its high audio and video quality for podcast production, Zencastr provides a full suite of production tools to record, produce, and publish studio quality content from the comfort of your home. Just log in through your browser and start recording. It's that simple. For us, we simply send out links to our guests and they join the lobby. But before you know it, it's all done and you have your studio quality audio and up to 4K video right there ready for you, right when you finish. The best part is having their multi-layered backups to ensure that your recordings are in the highest quality, regardless of anyone's internet connection stability. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcasts in one place and distribute to all the major destinations. It's really that easy. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Krewe of Japan, KREWEOFJAPAN, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's your time to share your story.